So, good afternoon and welcome to my first 15-minute book review. So, today I'm doing a book review of Up the Organization. So, it's how to stop the corporation from stifling people and strangling profits. And this is this is one of my first 15-minute sessions, because before, what I did is I did a whole run through of the 10 books on my latest book list. So, I am going to kick it off by talking about why it is that this is such a great book. So the first thing is, and the reason I call it a gangster business book is because Robert Townsend pulls no punches whatsoever. He's in your face. He's very direct in everything that he's saying. And this was first published in 1971, which is another reason why I think it's so amazing, is it was first published in 1971, yet when you go through the issues that he talks about in this book, they are so relevant to today's business world. And I think that that's incredible. So to start with, I want to talk about the controversy. So I talked about the fact that, it's a bit of a controversial choice. And part of that stems from the fact that it is a 52-year-old book. So there are two things that I think might be a little bit controversial, why it doesn't really make it into a lot of the contemporary book lists. First one is about gender roles. So in his book, he talks very much, whenever he's talking about managers or executives, he refers to those as he and him. It's very clearly that they're men. And when he talks about support staff and secretaries and even the term secretaries, he refers to them as she and her. So again, back to 52 years ago, that was kind of what the world looked like it or don't like it. So again, and I know that in some of the revisions, because I have one of the original versions of the book here, and I know that they've done a number of revisions over the time. So, but anyways, in some of the revisions, I think that they've addressed some of that, but it's so ingrained in the book that honestly, to take it all out would change the book altogether. So the second thing that I think is would be controversial, he actually addresses race and racism in the book. It's one of the chapters. And what he talks about, and to quote, he says, anyone in touch with reality knows that essentially there needs to be equal opportunity within organizations. And he calls out the fact that it is skewed away from women and minorities. And what he says in here is that it needs to be, that change needs to be led by the top of the organization. And he also says that that he calls out people who do those things like those trite things where, you just hire a woman or you hire a Black person as a token to say, look, we're diverse. So he calls that out. And again, this is 52 years ago. So what he does do, which is the controversial part, is he goes through a few different phrases and he says, these are things that we used to hear in the workplace before, but we're not hearing those anymore. So it is showing some bit of progress. And in it, he uses a couple of terms that would not be cool today at all. And I really do think that in some of the newer versions that those have been edited out, because I don't really think it adds a ton. So I take the book in the spirit of the era that it was written in and the fact that this was just the circumstances at the time. So it doesn't bother me, but if these are things that would get under your skin and you couldn't get past the fact that it's an older book, then I would say that this is probably not the book for you. Now, if we get to why it is that I absolutely love this book, again, written 52 years ago. And for me, it's a very quick hit. He's in your face. He's direct. He's very funny. He has a very kind of deadpan kind of humor. And he talks about the pitfalls as well as the opportunities around leadership and management. And he doesn't come up with big strategies in terms of how to fix this. There are 160 chapters in this book. Most of the chapters are only a page. And in one case, and I'm going to read that chapter to you, it's actually one sentence. The entire chapter is one sentence. So he's very direct and to the point, and he's just like hitting them off in terms of here are key things and pitfalls for managers and ways that you can be better. So that is definitely something that I love about the book, is the straightforwardness. The other thing that I would say is right out front, he talks about the difference between a Theory X company, which is where we assume that people hate to work. They try to avoid work, and really you need to micromanage people in order to get them to do what you need them to do. You need lots of controls and reports and managers constantly monitoring people to make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing. Versus a Theory Y company, which is what he advocates, which is understanding that seeing work as being something that's natural and that people naturally want to do well and to perform. as long as they're in an environment that kind of supports that sort of situation. So he definitely promotes the whole theory why version. And like I said, what he does as well, which is the other reason why I love the book, this is an indictment on bureaucracy. He goes after a lot of different roles and functions, lawyers, management consultants, business schools. But at the crux is not about those particular functions or those particular roles. What he really goes against are form over function. Being overly professional just for the sake of looking overly professional or meeting some sort of expectation. He also talks about bureaucracy and red tape. He says the highest function of a manager is to be able to remove any roadblocks for his people or her people. Well, here he actually says his people, because like I told you, it was written 52 years ago, to remove any blockages that's preventing them from doing their job well. He actually, in one part again, because I told you that there's humor, he talks about anytime there's a new form or intake process that gets introduced into the organization, he says it should never be done before the CEO's had to use it himself. Not having somebody on his team use it, but he or she, I could say today, would be using it themselves. And if they're cool doing the form, then introduce the form into the organization. And that's humorous because it's so often that there are so many things that get introduced that are time consuming, get in the way. And it's not until it gets to the alert of somebody more senior that all of a sudden they're like, well, why do we do this? Whereas people who are more junior in organizations don't often feel the empowerment to be able to push back on those things. And he talks about the concept. He doesn't talk about the concept, but what he's saying is the concept of servant leadership, where really managers are there to get things done through their people. He is not big on the whole hierarchy. He talks about not having, where we have the idolizing the senior executives. He's like, everybody within an organization has a different role. So you're just a different person with a different role, and your compensation and everything else is aligned to what your role does. So he is very much about the fact that as managers, our primary focus is to make sure that we are able to clear the path for our employees to be able to do their work and get any blockages out of the way. Hates form over function. He hates bureaucracy. So I'm just going to share with you just a couple, like I said, some of these chapters. So I'll share with you the shortest chapter in the book. So this is the shortest chapter in the book right here. It's in alphabetical order. Whoops. And it simply says, thanks is the name of the chapter. And the entire content of the chapter says it's a really neglected form of compensation. And then the other chapter I was going to share with you is one that's called reorganizing. And as you know, there are lots of reorgs that happen over time within organizations. So what he says about reorganizing is that it should be undergone about as often as major surgery, and should be as well planned and as swiftly executed. He said, I was to learn later in life that we tend to meet any new situation by reorganizing. And a wonderful method it can be for creating the illusion of progress while producing confusion, inefficiency, and demoralization. So again, what he very much attacks in the entire book is about that whole concept of just being a big corporation and doing things a certain way, and as opposed to being very focused on adding value, being close to clients. I'll share with you a couple of other concepts that he talks about in the book, which again, I think is so progressive for a book that's 52 years old. So he actually advocates the concept that therapists should be available in the workplace for workers at any time. And what he said is they should only be available as long as the data from their conversations with employees is absolutely off limits to anybody in management. Like that's just between the employee and the therapist to work through whatever it is that they need to work through. So he advocates for having therapists within organizations, which is very, 2020 and forwards. He talks about calling ourselves up. So again, holding ourselves accountable, being humble, and calling yourself up. So seeing what kind of service you get. So he says, call your customer service number, ask for something, and see what kind of service you get. Again, keeping your feet to the fire and making sure that you are current in terms of what's going on in your organization, and not just getting your information fed to you through your team members or through reports and presentations that get delivered to you, but really getting your hands dirty and call up the organization and see if you're happy with the service that you get. And if you don't, do something about it. The other thing he talks about, because he talks about leaders should spend time on a regular basis, so monthly, in frontline roles, getting close to customers and understanding what life is like for frontline workers. And he says it's something that keeps you grounded, it keeps you humble, and it also introduces that whole respect for the front line, because in many organizations, sometimes frontline workers don't get the respect that they deserve as being the face and the name for many consumers of the company. That's the people that they engage with. So he talks about leaders all on a regular basis having a practice of having to go and do frontline roles. This one, which really struck me when I read the book again, as a refresher to get ready for this, is he talks about office hours. And he says that we all have different biological clocks and that we should actually have our office hours aligned to our clock. And one of the examples he says is if you're good from noon until midnight, you should be able to work those hours as long as it doesn't have a negative impact on the organization, depending on what your role is, obviously, which I thought is very progressive, because that's things that you hear about like in Silicon Valley and stuff like that, and these tech firms that are thought to be ultra forward thinking in the last little while. But again, this was in 1971 is when he was talking about that. So again, very progressive, talks about mistakes and the fact that managers should be talking about mistakes very openly. And he said himself, he says his batting average is, I think, 33%. He said 33% of his decisions work out, and they're great. He goes, the other 2/3, he's had to tweak them or maybe even reverse them, and talking about it and just making it regular, that you talk about it, you talk about what worked, what didn't work, what you would do differently, and then modeling that for your team members so that they understand that that's just a part of regular business and there's absolutely nothing wrong with, as opposed to putting up posters and talking about embracing failure and all these other terms that we use. Just model it every day and just be somebody who just talks about, mistakes as a routine part of getting to the good decisions. He talks as well about pushing decisions as far down the organization as makes sense. So he's like, you shouldn't be paying, managers to be making decisions like whether you buy blue pens or black pens. That's something that should be done as far down the organization to remove blockages and to have things flowing, and as well, and most importantly, to empower people so that they have decision-making power over some of those decisions that is within their purview to be able to talk about. And also low risk, like if you buy blue pens and then you decide you need black, very low risk to make those kinds of changes. So what I wanted to talk about here in closing, as we come up on the 15 minutes, which was really quick, is a lot of times we think about these empowering work environments where we talk about being more human and all this stuff as very progressive new concepts, but they're actually not. And I'll tell you, this book here, which I'm also going to do a book review on, called No Rules Rules, which was written by Reed Hastings, who is one of the founders of Netflix and the CEO. So much of what is in Up the Organization mirrors what's in No Rules Rules in terms of reducing bureaucracy, not having vacation policy, like all of that was in this book 52 years ago. So what I wanted to say about that is, like, the workplace was a human place. It was more human. There were organizations where, GE being one of them. What's the other one that I was going to talk about? If there's a documentary on Netflix called Downfall, which talks about Boeing and the evolution of Boeing. And you see where back in the day, 50s and 60s, people took a lot of pride, and organizations took a lot of pride in the fact that their employees were doing well. And that changed when there was this whole shareholder value, and it was all about increasing shareholder price and squeezing out employees, and that became less important. So what I wanted to leave a note on here is the fact that these concepts were here before. We just lost them, and now we're getting back to them in terms of being more human and having empowering work environments where we take pride in the fact that our employees and our team members are doing well. And it's not just about the share price and about the executive team to be taken well care of. It's about having a healthy, thriving organization. These are not new concepts. These are old concepts that we've abandoned, and now we're thankfully seem to be coming back to that space. So anyway, so that is my first 15-minute book review on Up the Organization. I do recommend it. Like I said, I do have those two caveats that it is some dated references and some dated terms around, gender and race. And I will end on the fact that you tell me what book, what business book, mainstream business book even thought about including a chapter about racism in it. And he's not a trailblazer. He's not a civil rights champion or anything like that. He just, like I said, these are just very quick hits on things. But the fact that it's even in a book that was written 52 years ago, I think is quite remarkable. So I highly recommend it. If you do read it, please, I would love if you would send me a note and let me know what you think of it. So other than that, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching my 50-minute book summary. If you like content like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll get alerted anytime there's a new video that's uploaded. As a coach, I offer both group and individual sessions, so check out dionthewriter.com in the links below to see what option works for you. And finally, you can follow me on my social media platforms by either Dion the Writer or Dion England. So I look forward to seeing you next time.